Hi, baby boomer fans. We are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade. Grab your favorite malt or Green River. Make sure you are wide awake and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat. Hello, everybody. Hello, Jackie. And Jackie's in Washington. I am in Iowa. And so we do get to see each other pretty frequently through the 1950s Fun Chats. And today is number 161 in our series of 1950s Fun Chats, telling the stories of the 1950s. Jackie, take it away.
Okay, visitors and viewers, thank you so much for joining us. And I would like to call your attention to the purple banner on the lower part of the screen. We ask you to go to www.wildthewindmillwatch.com for all sorts of information about the book, about the vendors who are selling our book, about the places where we will be signing books, perhaps, and also the 1950s Fun Chats. There are 100, this is 161. So we've been doing this for a couple of years now. And we're doing this so that we get a record of 50s history as told by those who knew it best. Yes. So in the upper right-hand corner, there is the book that spurred this chat, While the Windmill Watched, a slice of rural America in the 1950s. You'll also notice a little white spot there. Hard to read, but it says that it is the winner of an Independent Press Award in regional category as the most distinguished favorite book. This happened in 2022. So we are very pleased to have that little icon on the book. Now let's go on with our show. Mm-hmm. So sisters, mm-hmm. who, as with many sisters, are not alike in personality, but have shared much during their formative lives. The elder of our sisters is Jean Lory. You can wave, Jean. Who are you? Jean Lory was born in 1930 and raised in Des Moines, Iowa. She attended an inner city high school and then received a full scholarship to Grinnell College and graduated in 1952 with a BA degree in English. In 1972, she received an MA, a master's in librarianship, from San Jose State. She lived in California for 64 years before moving back to Iowa in 2018. Now, much of Jean's formative years were influenced by the Depression and World War II. We're going to learn more about that today. And today, she lives in Green Hills. It's a life plan retirement community in Ames, Iowa. Well, 5 years after Jean's birth, sister Joan was also born in Des Moines. Except for 2 years, she has lived in Iowa. Except for 2 years, she has lived in Iowa all her life. Joan graduated from Iowa State College, which is now Iowa State University, in 1957 with a Bachelor of Science degree in sociology. After graduation, she became a stay-at-home mom until her husband, Joan Mathews, attended graduate school. Joan then became employed by the Iowa Department of Human Services as a social worker. Later, she became the county director in Dallas and Madison counties in Iowa. Joan has lived in Green Hills community in Ames, Iowa since 2001. So Jean and Joan, we welcome you to the 1950s Fun Chat.
Yes.
So today we're going to focus on comparisons before and after and during the 1950s and how the residential locale, meaning West Coast versus Midwest, influence each sister's life. So Jean, let's begin with you. Since your life began in 1930, perhaps you can mention how the Great Depression influenced you as a little girl, and also mention how your father was paid in script.
Well, of course, I only know how it influenced me through the behavior and tales of my parents. I mean, I was unaware that I was living through Depression times. One story that I remember is I was the first grandchild in the family, in the Lory family, and my brother had 3 younger brothers, and they were they may have been two of them may have been in college at this time, but they were always looking for part-time jobs. They didn't have a job. My father, of course, was employed as a teacher, and mother invited them for Christmas dinner because money for food was hard to come by for them not having a job. And they brought me a Christmas present. Mother always said that this was a real sacrifice. They pooled their pennies and nickels. And what they brought me was a papier mache Santa Claus, about 12 years old. And I still have that Santa Claus, and it stood under the family Christmas tree ever since then. Of course, my parents are now deceased, so now I have it.
What a precious gift.
And
did you realize at the time, other than your mother's perhaps mentioning to you that it was a sacrifice for them to?
Oh, no. This was later when she told me how we acquired this Santa Claus, or how I acquired this Santa Claus. No, because I was only 9 months old. It made much of an impression.
Correct.
Well, you mentioned your father was
Jackie asked me to, Jackie
Yes, right.
mentioned script. I just remember being told this. My father had a job, of course, all through the Depression. But for a period of time, and I don't know whether it was just 1 year or how many, they didn't receive cash income. They received script. And this script was then recognized. Perhaps they could pay their electric bill with it. And certain stores would honor. And so they could buy groceries, possibly, or pay their electricity bill with this script. That's all I remember about that.
Do you know if the storekeeper then was able to?
That I don't know, because since it came up, that's the first time I thought about that.
So how did the influence of the 30s carry over into the 50s in your personal life?
Well, we were always very frugal. We saved money. And I've always been raised to save money. I might tell you something that happened after we bought our house on Arnold Road, where Joan was raised and I was raised from age 7 on. In 3rd grade for Halloween, we were supposed to dress up in costume, to go to school for a Halloween party. And Mother was going to make my costume, and I probably didn't tell her that everybody was supposed to wear a costume until very late in the week. And she made all our clothes sewed, and so she made a costume. I think I was supposed to be a little goat girl, from the Swiss Alps. And so she made a little apron, and I probably had a mask and a little hat. But all the other kids, this was 1938, probably 7 or 8, had store-bought costumes. And, I understood perfectly, why we wouldn't spend money on a store-bought costume that you could wear once. But my mother had, spent the time and worked hard on doing this, and yet so I felt guilty about not being appreciative, but I also was very I felt left out because I didn't have a store-bought costume. And I've hated costume parties ever since. I never wanted to go to a costume party. So that definitely was, if it hadn't been Depression, why then they could.
Right.
Jean, you aren't the first one to share that same feeling. from the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and probably going into the 60s. We had that happen in our family too. And it's interesting how it does rest on your soul all these years.
That's right. So,
Yes.
Joan, you were a 5-year-old at that time, at the end of the 30s. So, is there anything you can recall about that period of time?
No, because as I look back, I seem to have cost my folks a lot of money in medical bills.
Oh.
I had many incidences where I ended up in the hospital or the doctor's office. And those are the only things I remember. Some of them not of my own choosing,
Sure.
some of them because I didn't do what I was told to do.
Uh-oh.
Oh, yeah.
But I got all of my illnesses over then. And so it's been smooth sailing since then.
Okay.
I'm curious to know. Of course, we grew up on a farm, and a city was close to us. But what was it like to grow up in the city of Des Moines, in your area? How about your friends, your schools?
Well, this is interesting because I have friends in the neighborhood,
Mhm.
and some of them had older sisters that were Jean's friends, and we played outside, and in the wintertime, rather than sliding down a hill, we slid down the city street because in the 40s, there were very few cars, and because of rationing for gasoline and tires, people were very careful about driving cars. So we didn't think, a few years ago, there was a little girl killed sliding down the hill in a lawn out into the street and got killed, which was very tragic. But the other difference is because there were 5 high schools in Des Moines, we did not, for football games, go to out of town for football games. Football games were not a community event, as I understand they are in small towns.
Mm-hmm.
And the question's a little hard since I always lived in a city, but people in metropolitan areas would not think Des Moines was a city. It's difficult to compare how my life was different from children living in rural communities, or as you and Jackie did on a farm. I can't make that comparison.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you mentioned the war. So in what ways Jean, do you think the war affected you? I mean, I realize there were probably many, but what comes to mind in a way that the war affected you? And maybe include that summer activity that you enjoyed as a family when you're speaking.
Well, this is both the Depression and the war. When we moved into the bungalow on Arnold Road, we were surrounded by vacant lots, and my father immediately started gardening. He missed gardening. He grew up, gardening on a farm, and so we had, and they were big lots, so there was a lot of produce, and so we immediately started canning and tipped many beans, tomatoes, skinned them and canned them. And so that was all our produce, for the winter. I mean, we never bought vegetables. We always had our own. And that saved money, you see. We didn't have to spend. And then during the war, it was very important to have gardens. There were even what they called victory gardens, but we'd already been gardening for many years. And another thing, there was rationing. Meat, you got coupons to buy meat and coupons to buy sugar and flour. Do you remember?
No, I don't remember flour, but meat and sugar. And then, of course, gasoline and the to run cars.
And tires, you see, you couldn't get tires. You couldn't buy cars.
Mm-hmm.
Were you limited to use those rationing coupons at certain stores in your neighborhood?
Well, we always stopped. There was a grocery store just 2 blocks away, and that's where we did all our shopping. There weren't supermarkets at that time, and there weren't, and you called in your order, or your mom sent you to the order with a list, or when you were old enough, you could just remember what you were supposed to, and then you ordered at the counter, and he got it off the shelves and everything.
Mhm.
So we always shopped, but the ration coupons were good at any store that had what you wanted.
Mhm.
So you mentioned calling. When did you get your telephone?
Oh, we always had a telephone.
Oh,
Oh,
yes, yes.
I mean, I do not, and it was a dial phone.
yeah.
I called them candlestick phones, and Jean did not recognize that experience, but it was a phone with the mouthpiece at the top of a stem
Uh-huh.
and then the dial on the bottom.
Okay.
And I don't remember when we got a phone with the cradle, but yes, we always had a telephone.
Well, that comes from living in the city. We in
Yeah,
the country.
that's the city.
And always electricity and running water
Uh-huh.
and
And sewer, probably in the city, sewer septic
Well,
system.
The store was, I'm sorry, you're saying like a grocery store?
No, like a toilet, be able to have an indoor toilet.
Yes, we had indoor plumbing.
Okay,
We did not have a shower. We had a bathtub with claw feet.
sure. Uh-huh. Was it in many families, the bath happened on Saturday night? Was that how it was in your family too?
We always had baths Saturday night, but I think we will actually have baths other time because we would go down to the basement to light the hot water heater.
well, you didn't.
I did when I got older.
Well, yes, as you got older, that hot water heater was a big problem for me because my father wanted me to learn how to do it, so he wouldn't have to go down to the basement and light the hot water every time somebody wanted. And I was scared to death. I was scared to death that it would blow up. But he said, well, you'll get a bicycle when you learn how to light the water. And
bribery.
and so I just steeled myself and learned how to do it. I never liked doing it. I came home one day from school, and there on the porch was a bicycle.
Oh, sweet.
But was that just your bicycle, or did you need to share it with your
Oh, I
siblings?
shared it with Joan.
Oh, that was nice.
That was her bicycle too. But see, that was I was probably about 9, 10.
10 when you got it.
So she was just 5.
And so she didn't have, by the time she was in high school is when I started riding it. So she would not be riding it in high school. So she didn't have to share very.
Oh, that worked out well then.
So, Jean, if you weren't riding that bicycle, were you driving a car?
Oh, not until I took driver training in summer school between my junior and senior year. This would have been 1947. And they taught driver's ed in summer school. I don't think they offered it during the school year at that time. And it was a very, one of the things we had to do, and we had to do it. It wasn't just reading about how to do it, was change a tire, jack the car up and take the tire. Oh, that was hard. I never changed a tire in my life. I always called for assistance.
Well, that takes strength too, of your arm strength to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the cars were lighter. She said this was 1947.
Okay.
So this car was very likely built in the 30s, and the cars were much lighter than they are today.
Well, I think and for driver training, the car was newer than the car we owned.
Yeah, but because of the war, they did not start manufacturing cars again until the late 40s. Jean mentioned that the Depression and World War II made us frugal, but that frugality all the families, there was a lot of built-up demand, so that when the 50s came, the lots that our father gardened on, houses were built on those lots in the early 50s. And cars, people started buying newer cars in the end of the 40s and the 50s. So the Depression of World War II, because commodities were scarce. Then after the war, when the GIs came back, there was a lot of built-up demand for consumer goods. And so it affected people's buying habits in the 50s.
Sure. Yes.
That's right.
And most likely people didn't buy anything in that era unless they had the money saved for it.
Right. Cash.
Would that have been true in your family too?
Oh, definitely. Dad never bought a car on credit except for his first car back in the 1920s. He paid cash, and that's what I've always done because that's the way I was raised.
Yes.
Well, in fact, the first car we bought after the war, there were savings bonds during the war.
Sure.
And my father gave me a stack of savings bonds and told me to add them up to see if we had enough money saved to buy a car. And I did, and I must have been 11 or 12.
No, this was the
In the
49.
49, so I would have been 14. And when they walked in, Dad told me I had made a mistake adding them up, the savings bonds, and I was just sick that we didn't have enough money for a car. Fortunately, the mistake was in the other way.
Yes.
Had more money, but
good.
he walked in and said I had made a mistake.
Oh.
Teasing you, wasn't he?
Well, yes, but I didn't know it.
I know that. I know that.
Right. So was it in the 50s when you might have gotten your first television?
Oh, it was in 1958 when I got my first television.
No, but the family.
And the folks got their first television. I was in college, so it must have been
53, I think.
53 or 54. I walked into the house and they had a TV, and it blew my mind away.
Yes. And did you see all the snowy stuff on the screen?
I didn't feel it. When I was in high school, one of my high school friends their family had gotten a TV. This would have been early 50s. And I went over after school to watch TV, and it was very snowy.
Yes. Do you remember the first television program that you saw? Either of you remember?
I have no idea.
Well, I didn't see. I was in California, of course.
Sure.
And so the first television show I probably saw was Sunday night, because whatever the resident club, the guest house population listened to. And, in that class, Janine, that we had on the 50s, people talked about the Ed Sullivan Show.
Yes.
And we, of course, watched that once in a while, but the Sunday night show that was watched at the Residence Club was the Steve Allen Show, which was in competition with.
Yes.
So probably that, I would guess that might have been the first show.
Did you ever watch Lawrence Welk?
But
I didn't.
When we got, I say we, my husband and I got our first TV in 58. We did watch Lawrence Welk regularly on Saturday night. Yes.
Good.
Okay.
So anything more about that, Janine, or shall we go on?
I'm kind of curious now to see. We know that Joan moved to California, or Jean rather, moved to California. What happened out there, Jean?
Well, here's the next question. Now, Jean, after college, you taught English and Latin in Webster City, Iowa.
Well,
you were very frugal with your salary. So how was this accomplished? How were you frugal, and what was your goal?
Well, because in Webster City, where I did my first teaching, my first job out of college, there were several beginning teachers, first year teachers, and so we, palled around together. I rented a room, a second story, big bedroom in the home of two maiden sisters who were teachers themselves, and they rented out this bedroom. $7 a week. That was my lodging. And I could share the kitchen, so I could get my breakfast and pack my lunch, and I suppose even cook my dinner, but we always went out for dinner. I mean, the other new teachers and I. And there was a restaurant in Webster City, I think it was called the Maid Right, that had a 66-cent dinner, 66 cents for dinner. And you got eggs any way you wanted, potatoes, vegetable, a little side salad, piece of bread, and a beverage. And I would take the bread home for toast the next morning. So I would have eggs prepared a different way every night. And then I usually went home on the weekends, and because there was a bus from Webster City to Des Moines, or somebody might be going. And I would come back with a dozen eggs and have an egg for breakfast and the toast from the restaurant the night before. And I'd probably bring fruit and apples and oranges too from home. And then I'd have a hard-boiled egg for lunch with a piece of fruit and eggs for dinner. And I had very little food expense that first year.
Do you like eggs today?
Oh, yes, I still like
Okay.
I know the brunch menus had meals.
It'd be easy to get burned off.
And what I was saving money for, because the year I had a college classmate that after graduation, she and another college friend had made a 4-month trip to Europe, stayed in hostels and bicycled. And, you could do Europe on $5 a day. And so another friend and I thought, oh gosh, if they could do that, maybe we could do it. But we didn't have the money to do it right upon graduation. And this other friend was also teaching that first year, and she was close to home. And so we decided that we could save enough money to the next year do this for Europe on $5 a day for 4 months. But we did have to save enough money in 1953, you didn't fly to Europe, you went by ship. So we had to save enough money, for the ship. And so we were planning that all through our first year teaching. And we found out in February that we could get a third class ticket. We, of course, couldn't go first class. We were to Europe in August and coming back in December. So that's why I was so frugal. And no new clothes. I didn't buy any clothes. So we both had saved enough to be able to do that.
At what port did you dock? What country was your first country? Where did you dock?
We docked at Southampton in England, and then we sailed from Naples in Italy on the return trip.
Okay.
What kind of ship was that coming home? Tell me about the passengers.
Well, coming home, there were a lot of Italian immigrants.
Oh, sure.
Well, that was and that was, of course, going over. We went on the USS United States, and that was a premier shipping ship line. It was the fastest trip to passage to Europe at that time. And so, and we were third class, and so they were other impoverished people. There weren't any immigrants going, the other way. And they were Americans. But coming home out of Naples, and they didn't speak English. And it was so interesting because they would just peel their oranges if they had an orange on the deck and just throw the peels on the floor. This was I'm not implying that they were dirty people, but that's that's the way they did in
their culture.
Eat at an outdoor restaurant and peel the orange and just drop it on the floor.
Huh.
So that took some. Well, you don't get used to it, but I just observed, and they didn't speak English, although there were in third class other English-speaking people.
So Joan, you attended a different college, and your plans were different than Jean's. Tell us about your college experience and then plans after that.
Well, I went to Iowa State. You indicated Jean had a scholarship to Grinnell. Mm-hmm. I knew that I wasn't smart enough to get a scholarship. And so I had to go to a state school, which was fine. Nothing wrong with going to a state school. So I went to Iowa State because in 1953, I wanted to be a dietitian. Mm-hmm. So I came to be in home ec. That lasted 2 quarters. We were on the quarter system back then. Mm-hmm. And decided I was better suited for science and humanities. So I got out of home ec and went into another field totally. But the 50s, besides going to college, I graduated from high school in 53, got married in 55, had a child in 56, graduated college in 57, moved to Illinois, went 57 for a couple of years. So it was spent, I realized, in the 50s, rock and roll came in. Mm-hmm. And I recognized the music, but I didn't have time to listen to the radio. We didn't have TV. Mm-hmm. Even when, after I got out of school, I didn't watch TV. We watched Lawrence Welk, and I watched Captain Kangaroo as the children got older. Mm-hmm. But TV was just not part of my life. But my 50s were crammed everything into the 50s.
Yes, yes. Well, that happens with a lot of people, I would imagine, whose childhood started in the 40s, and then there's so much that happens in anyone's life once you get out of high school, and the changes that can occur, and the places you will go and see too at that point.
And speaking of that, Jean, when I was speaking with you, that song, "How Are You Going to Keep Them Down on the Farm After They've Seen Paris?" And so that trip infected you and sent you on a trajectory away from Iowa.
Well, it wasn't so much, it was partly that trip, but it was partly going to Grinnell, where many of my friends turned out to be from Chicago or a Chicago suburb. They lived in the big city. They lived in the metropolitan area. And my freshman year, the woman who became my very closest friend, she lived above all the freshman women at Grinnell were in cottages just for freshman women. The years weren't mixed, so you got very well acquainted with the freshman class. And she had the room above me, and we would signal each other. She pounded on her floor, and I pounded on my ceiling, ready to go someplace. But Easter vacation, she invited me to spend Easter vacation spring break, this would be equivalent to, at her home in a apartment on the near north side in Chicago. Oh, and this is my first big city experience. Oh, I just loved it. And then we visited friends that lived in the suburbs, and we big cities. I just fell in love with them. And so that inspired me to want to live in a big city. And then I visited Chicago many, many times since then. And then, of course, when I went to Europe, we drove to New York City. And that was Joan's first experience in a big city. And and she was interested, but she was very happy to get back to small town life. And I should tell you, very interesting experience. I went out to California with my last $300, and I had no contacts in San Francisco, but we found a boarding house, what they were called guest houses, which worked out beautifully. And that was I arrived in February, 1st of February in San Francisco. That summer, 53, the family drove
54.
up. Oh, yes, it was 54. I arrived in February 54. And that summer, 54, the family came out to visit me in San Francisco. And I just couldn't wait to show them the wonders of San Francisco. And to me, it had many, many wonders. And I was so disgusted with Joan because she was in college, you see, at this point. I thought she'd be swept off her feet as I was. And all she was interested in doing was getting back after we'd been out sightseeing, getting back to my guest house to see if she had any letters from Don.
Yeah.
And she just couldn't wait so there's the huge difference. See, she had no desire to live in a big. I just remember how I was so annoyed that she wasn't properly impressed.
So, Joan, what do you have to say about that? Joan, time to defend yourself.
Yep.
It wasn't quite that bad. I do remember one or two times, but it is true. I am not a city person. That is true. But my story about San Francisco was I was only 17, so I wasn't old enough to drink. And we went to Top of the Mark, which was at the top of the hotel and the revolving restaurant. I was dressed up, gloves and a hat.
Yeah.
And, I was with my parents, of course, and Jean. And wait staff immediately recognized that I was under 18. But since I was with my parents, they did let me in because it must have been more of a bar type than a restaurant type. But
Mm-hmm. So, ladies, we are nearing the end of our broadcast already. It's gone quickly. Yes. If there, each of you think of this, please. If there is a highlight from the 1950s that affected your life, and it's still affecting your life, what might that have been? Jean, would you like to begin?
Well, the event of the 1950, I think leaving Des Moines and going to California. That certainly, and I had no job connections. I had to find a job, find a place to live. But it all worked out just beautifully.
How about you, Joan? Any particular memory that comes to mind of the 50s?
Well, I suppose it would be my marriage and my family.
Sure.
I mean, that was more important than graduating from Iowa State. I mean, it was important for me to graduate from Iowa State, to graduate from college, but I'm not a die-on-the-wall Cyclone fan. It's my family that's most important.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
All righty.
Thank you. Thank you. Jean, Lory, and Joan Mathews, we are grateful for your stories and that you shared them with us today. Thank you very much. And viewers, we thank you for watching too. This is a wonderful way for you to experience more of the beautiful history of the 1950s. Okay, Jackie, take it away.
Okay, well, ladies, it has been delightful. We certainly thank you for your time. And viewers, thank you for your time, for taking a break and watching this 1950s Fun Chat. It's number 161. And tell your friends, even your relatives, about the 1950s Fun Chat. Till next time.